welcome back to another episode of Sorry for Rambling. We changed some things up. We're not doing them live anymore. But I'm still Alex Cack, and I am joined today by Dr. Edward Mooney, who is an EDD of educational psychology. Dr. Mooney, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Alan.
So just let's give a primer here, because I think you're the most educated person we've had on the show so far. What does a doctor of educational psychology do?
Well, first of all, put it in the context of teaching. So it's the psychology of teaching, which involves things like how do kids develop and grow up? How do we learn how to think? Metacognition, motivation, things like classroom and behavior management. If you've been a teacher, you realize that you don't have 30 kids that are identical in your classroom. How to spot different personalities and how to work with different personalities. So it's basically the psychology of running a classroom.
Interesting. And so is there like a hyper specialization that people in your field do? I mean, do people wind up working with more like post-secondary education or primary education, or do you guys kind of just tackle it all?
We go from K through university level. Most of us who specialize in this become professors of education, and we are in the business of training teachers. So that's probably we're very narrow in that regard, I guess.
You know, there's so much kind of rhetoric around teaching right now, I feel like, and so much of it has to do with kind of the administrative end or the policy end of our public schools. But when you really get into the classroom, I think what are the issues that you see that we face right now inside the classroom?
Well, number one, as an educator, my first concern is about relationships. All education starts with a good relationship. And I always ask people, look back when you were in, say, high school or middle school. The teachers you felt you connected with, you probably did better in their classes. They probably interested you in that subject matter. And I think if we develop a really good relationship, everything happens. By the way, there have been studies that have shown that if you have a conflict with a teacher, it tends to build walls between people, which shuts down learning. So I would say if you had to pick one thing, that would be it. Of course, I go back to the idea of, we always talk about what's called Bloom's taxonomy, which is you want to get to higher level creative thinking. And you start at the bottom with like remembering a fact. Well, you can't really do much of that until you get into what is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what that is if a kid comes to your class and he hasn't eaten, he can't bathe, things like that, what you're trying to do is too far up on the Bloom's taxonomy. They're just trying to survive. By the way, right now, what we're seeing in the time of coronavirus is a lot of that. I have a lot of parents who are asking me, what do I do with my young person who's not doing their work at all? It's really difficult when you've got trauma going on to focus on higher level work. And by the way, what we're seeing with coronavirus is a form of trauma for the entire society and world. So trauma tends to shut learning down quite rapidly. I grew up with an abusive alcoholic father. Trauma affected me through high school. I thankfully was able to overcome it because of a couple of wonderful teachers. I like to mention one of them's name, Mr. Lowell Schroeder, who was just incredibly kind to me through high school. But the trauma is right now, I think, one of the biggest issues. We talk about testing, we talk about how to run this or run that, but right now I think we need to go and focus on the young person who's trying to learn. What can we do to help them get to the place where they can learn? Let's look at some of the difficult things they're facing now.
And, you know, kind of touching on that, I mean, what are some things that you would recommend to both educators and really, I mean, to parents who are filling this role with their children right now, who are, you know, trying to learn from home?
Well, first of all, on my website, edwardmooney.net, I have a number of what I call teachable moments videos in which I give this kind of advice to parents. But right now, number one is don't expect as much. They're not going to just take what they were doing in the classroom and bring it home and just keep doing it. They're just as distracted as the rest of us are. I'm writing a book right now, and I find that my mind just wanders off, and I come back and, okay, what was I writing? It's because in the middle of the brain, the amygdala, the lizard brain is a nickname for it, is right now looking around for where am I going to get hit? What are the threats? What are the problems? And when you're dealing with that, it's difficult to say, well, let me talk about this theoretical something. No, your brain's going, no, you're about to lose your house, your job. Well, children are like that too. They see the stress with mom and dad, and so they're feeling the pull away from academics. I would recommend you do shorter lessons, that you break it up with some fun activities, and maybe focus on just one subject a day rather than jumping around. But the one thing I always tell teachers and parents, and you should do it even when we're back in school, is find ways that the young person can relate to the academics. There's something that they feel passionate about inside that they could bring it into the learning. One example I have is when I taught history. I remember a thing about World War II history, which I'm fascinated by. And a young person was an incredible artist. And I asked him to draw me, dioramas of things from World War II. The kid did incredible work. So all of a sudden he was very excited about history because he could connect his art with the topic I'm teaching. But again, in these strange times, leave room for the trauma and maybe keep them learning some basics. I've been telling parents that if you get the kids just to enjoy reading, you're doing a lot of education right there. You don't have to work off of a very rigid lesson plan. Excuse me, I can go on for a bit, I guess.
That's the point of the show. I mean, that's what I'm here to do, is to find things that will, hopefully, to ask questions that will provoke a long answer.
Well, one additional thing I might say is look back in your own life to the parents. How were you able to relate to the teachers of your childhood? Maybe use some of those same techniques for your kids. Anyway, sorry.
No, that kind of actually feeds into the next thing I wanted to ask about, which is, as we have these broader conversations, and obviously coronavirus is really expanding this right now, but as we're having broader conversations about kind of classroom almost reform and changing kind of the educational model, what do you say to parents or to administrators who tend to think more, well, why do we need to change the way we teach, this subject or that? This has worked before, I got to find education. What would you say to someone who has that kind of retort when we're talking about trying to improve the classroom?
Well, are we really changing education, or are we just changing methodology or structural things? For example, when I was in high school, I'm dating myself here, calculators came out, and our math teachers just freaked out. And they said, calculators won't always be around when you need one. Well, right now I have one on my phone, I have one on my computer, I have one everywhere. So they proved to be wrong. And, as I went through my life, I found that each time a piece of technology came out, there were older people saying, no, we can't use that. Now I'm like, wait a minute, do you realize that these young people learn in ways that we can't comprehend? You see, their minds are growing. Young people, their mind is not as rigid as mine is. I'm in my mid 60s now. And they're learning by using technology. Whereas for us, it's really difficult to learn with technology. It's kind of like if we learned with textbooks, which I did, if the older teachers were to say, no, you can't use a textbook, you've got to listen to what I say. I would have said, but I learn by reading books. We've got to adapt. Right now, the biggest challenge is about the use of cell phones. I hear teachers who are saying, I don't want any cell phones in my classroom. That's not really good. The other extreme, which is, just let them use cell phones all the time, doesn't seem to be working either. So this is where we educators have got to be on the forefront. We've got to find new ways to use cell phones in our classrooms that are constructive. There are numerous software packages like Socrative that allow kids to use their cell phones to answer questions to the teacher. There's an idea right there. But we have to adapt. Learning is not stagnant. What I'm teaching, what I was taught in high school, I think is now being taught in like 6th, 7th grade. So learning grows, knowledge grows. Kids relate to technology a lot better than my generation does. We have to adapt. I do a lot of teaching online. And when I first started doing it, I was kicking and screaming, getting dragged into teaching online. They almost had to threaten me to do it. Now I've learned that the negatives that were brought up, we can overcome them. The one thing that keeps a kid learning is engagement. If I have a kid really excited about learning, they're going to learn. You can still do that with online learning. We have to learn how to do that. When I hear people say, no, let's stay with the old system, what I really hear is, I don't want to change. I understand that. I'm hesitant with change also. But we have to. If we're really focused on the kids, we have to change.
And we do see a rise even before COVID. We were seeing a rise in online only education. Online college, online classes at brick and mortar universities, and even online only high schools over the last 10, 15 years. Do you think that is the future of education? Is it going to be just a kid sitting in their bedroom in front of a laptop or an iPad, or is there still going to be a place for kind of traditional brick and mortar classroom education?
I think what we're going to see is a hybridization. You're going to, when I went off to college, I stayed in the dorm and I went to my classes. I got my textbooks at the bookstore. My two youngest kids graduated from my same undergraduate institution, Montana State University. And before they graduated, I noticed they ordered their books online. They took some of their classes in the classroom. They took some, online. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. There are some courses, like for example, I was thinking of a medical school. When you do a dissection, you're going to need to be there in person. But I think more and more we're going to see a blending, a blurring, if you will. And this isn't a bad thing. Think of how many people have access to higher education because of technology that wouldn't otherwise. A lot of people just can't quit their jobs, sell their house, and move far away to go to college. And I think we're seeing that more and more. I was just seeing that things like Amazon, Twitter, those companies are saying to their employees, maybe you don't have to come back after the coronavirus is gone. Maybe you can continue working from home. My daughter she's an environmental scientist, and she's hearing that she can go back a couple days a week and work from home a couple days a week. So I think education is going to follow that model. In 10 years, I have a feeling we're going to see most courses being taken online, with maybe you come in at the summer and take a couple of courses in a 3-week mini session on the campus. I think universities and colleges are going to offer you the choice. Do you want to come to campus? We can do that too. So I think higher education has got to learn how to be very much more flexible. Right now, by the way, I developed a master's degree in teaching in the online environment, and it's going to be offered completely online. So I think we're going to see, let's say in 20 years, that the majority of education will be online. I think there'll be new technologies. What we're using right now with you and I talking was incomprehensible to me like a decade ago. So there are going to be new tools. I see all things from Microsoft and Google advertising all kinds of new communication systems coming out. So that's going to change education completely. But I'm guessing. I couldn't have predicted this 10 years ago. So we'll see.
Are there, from a psychological perspective, are there drawbacks to a child or even to a young adult or an older adult learning only in an online environment as opposed to having a classroom with a teacher in person and peers?
I believe in what is called SEL, social emotional learning. And yes, that is a challenge right there. How do we develop relationships? A good educator realizes that what's going on in their classroom is social learning as well, how to work together as a team. Now, can we replicate that in a digital world? I don't think completely we can, no. But you see, the push is going to be from now on towards more and more online. Those of us in the education profession are going to say, well, how can we incorporate some of the things we know about social emotional learning into our online work. That's going to be a challenge for the next decade. I don't see that we'll be completely free with any relationships whatsoever. As I said, I don't know 10 years from now, but we've got to realize that kids playing together, by the way, play is not really what we think. Play is learning in an unstructured format. So kids playing together. I remember being a kid in a playground and we all would just get little cars and things like that and work together and make little cities in the dirt, stuff like that. We're learning how to work together. Can we replicate that digitally? I don't think, not completely, not with the technology we have now. But I think you're right. The biggest concern is development of social relationship skills with kids. You can't just be in a room all the time looking at a screen and have decent long-term relationship skills that way. No.
Or forge long-term relationships.
Right.
You know, so much of the kind of educational model at any level is to, at least to me, predicated somewhat on the social bonds that you build. You know, early friends, first loves, professional networking when you get to an older age are so ingrained in our scholastic and kind of academic environment and culture right now.
It is.
There is a whole side of emotional learning that's almost feels like it's being lost if you're isolating a student by themselves. That does bring me to something else you said there, which is that people don't realize that play is learning.
Yes.
And I think you could extrapolate beyond that and say that lifelong, pretty much everything you do is learning. Yeah. Any interaction you have, any task you perform, no matter how many times you've done it. But it does seem that we fail our students by teaching them to do so kind of intentionally.
You're touching on a topic in ed psych that's called executive functioning. My wife and I continually say, wasn't it great that we grew up when when all we did was go hang out with our friends in the neighborhood? And I don't know how you grew up, but the first thing we did when we hung out with our friends was, what do you want to do today? And my wife talks about, she grew up in an avocado orchard, and they would go out to an avocado orchard. And from what I understand of avocado trees, they tend to make a canopy on the outside, and they would go in and make a little house inside the avocado tree. And the girl next door would have the avocado tree next door, and they would they'd get boxes and things, and they'd build their own houses and their little dramas and create worlds. And I did the same thing in my backyard. I grew up near an orange grove in Southern California. And you see, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm in control of my day-to-day life. I have to use my imagination to create things that I want to do. We'd go down the street and we'd get a rubber ball and we'd create strange little games. And we had fun. But then the part of the fun is creating the games, not just playing them. What we're seeing more and more since I was a kid is what you described as a very structured environment. And I don't think that's healthy for a kid long term. And then what I'm seeing as a teacher and as a college professor is I've seen a lot of kids will come in and say, well, tell me what to do. I don't know what to do. And you're like, well, what do you want to do? I don't know, because they haven't grown up with the opportunity to figure out what they want to do. I tell everyone that my doctoral dissertation came out of my executive functioning. My first class at Northeastern University was on ethical decision making. And we were talking about a school shooting. And the professor said, your chore is to pick the kid who was doing the shooting or the kid who was shot and look at the ethics from both angles. And I said, what about the teacher who watched the shooting? How did it affect her? And the professor was, oh, we hadn't thought of that. And I said, could I look at that? And she gave me a pre-assignment. I did that. And I wrote a paper, and that became my doctoral dissertation, was on the trauma of a teacher witnessing a school shooting. We realized that no one had documented what was going on the teacher side. And right now, unfortunately, there have been a lot of school shootings, and there are a lot of teachers who have been affected. So you see, this has all gone back to my executive functioning. I decided, hey, could I look into this? I'd like to see that more with kids. And I'd say to parents, let your kids bring suggestions. Let them do a spin. You don't have to be rigid within a certain area. Anyway, I get very animated. This is one of my favorite topics.
I think it's an incredibly valuable one.
Yeah.
And when we were talking about choice at a young age, one of the things that it made me think of was actually choice at an older age.
Yes.
One thing that I noticed specifically, I think my own kind of primary educational background as a student, I mean, growing up where I did, we talk about economic disparity and achievement from high school graduates and kind of where they go in life. And one of the things that I feel like always gets left out of this conversation is choice on the student, but also the presentation of choices.
Yeah. One of the things I did as a high school teacher, and I still do as a professor, is I will, at the beginning of the term, ask somebody like, Alex, what are you interested in? What would you like to be doing? And you'd say something, well, I'm interested in political things, or I'm interested in art or whatever. And part of the assignment I always gave my students was, I want you to incorporate your interest into what we're teaching. So projects, papers, things like that. And the last question all of my tests was, how does what we just discussed affect your impact with your interests? I think we need to start doing that from an early age. They grow into things. And when kids start learning what they're interested in, all of a sudden the world becomes more interesting to them. Oh, I could use this, I could use that. And I think you're exactly right. And I remember as a kid, I like to bring up Mr. Edwards, my sixth grade teacher. I brought up an idea to him. I said, could we move, we were talking about international things, could we move our desks around into the shape of the United Nations, and each of us could be a country as we're talking about this? And Mr. Edwards smiled and said, that's a great idea. And so he reorganized the room, and we looked like the UN. And he said, okay, you can be these countries. And I thought, because I did this, I could be the United States. And he walked up to me and said, you either be New Zealand or Norway. And I was like, oh, but I want to be the US. He said, nobody's going to be the US. Everybody's got to look at a different country. And right over there, I still have the little flag of Norway that I had on my desk in sixth grade. Hold on a second. It's still here.
It's funny. I actually have the Norwegian flag tattooed on my arm. My
gosh.
mini. So this is I'll have to pull this clip out and show it to my grandma. Her family emigrated here from Norway into Minnesota, and then later down to Arizona. So it is. It's warms my heart a little bit to see that.
But you see how that stayed with me.
Yeah.
I mean, I still have a Norwegian flag on my desk. I'm Irish and Italian, but Norway has had it. These little things that teachers allow kids to bring into the classroom stay with them for a lifetime. And I think we need more of that right now. The test scores aren't what is going to change society. Kids getting passionate about learning is what's going to change society. Anyway.
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And again, just looking back at my own childhood education, I remember one standardized test I ever took. And I only remember it because I went in not knowing anything on it. Literally guessed. I think I put C for 2/3 of the answers, and I didn't just pass it. I exceeded the thing.
Really?
I did, and which tells you something about the standardized testing process in Arizona. But that's not what I remember, and I only remember because it's such a humorous anecdote. But what I do remember? I remember building dioramas and the research that I had to do to put into them. I remember, experiments we did in the fourth grade. Those are the things that I think pique curiosity in kids, at least from our experience.
You're right.
Yeah, and finding variation in it.
I remember one student many years ago. I was teaching world history, and I was teaching about Japan. And I love bringing in little facts about countries that people didn't realize. And it piqued her interest. She said, what, really, these things? I don't remember the list of them. And she started bringing in things on her own. You see, to me, that's the ultimate test of the teacher's ability. If you can evoke a response from the student who's saying, whoa, I want to bring my own things in on here, you're doing your job right there. And then the neat thing is, as a teacher, you sit back and they're running with it. They're gone. But years later, my wife and I were walking in the mall, and I heard my name being called out behind me. And I looked around. What was that? And I looked, and there was a woman with two little kids being pulled with her. And my wife looked at me and said, no, no, those are not my kids. I don't know who this woman is. And she ran up, and she pulled out of her purse all this literature about Japan. And she'd been to Japan. She decided to study Japanese culture. She worked for a company that had offices in Japan. And she said it all started in my class when I talked about Japan. And that warms my heart to think that I gave her, I just opened the door for her. It wasn't really me. It was I pointed at, there's Japan over there, and something clicked in her heart. So you see, we teachers have got to learn that we have to click with kids. Something has to click. And it sounds like for you, though, you just mentioned a number of things that have stayed with you all of these years. That's what we need to return to. And that's what I'm telling parents right now at home with kids. Find ways to get the kids to click into something.
You know, one of the, and I think this is a related topic, but one of the things that I think we've been so worried about is how unfocused many young students are, how little priority they put on actually learning the material or engaging with it on any type of kind of emotional basis. There's no desire to really learn or perform well, other than just to pass the test, get the grade, not get in trouble, etc. What are structural changes that you think could or should be implemented to help negate that apathy in our students?
Well, you've got to look at what is the root of the apathy. Why are they apathetic? A lot of people just fall on the idea of, well, they're teens. I'm sorry, after, I don't want to say how many years working with adolescents, the one thing I've realized is when you've got a teen motivated, you can't believe what they can do. It's amazing to me. We have, for many years now, been relying on what is called extrinsic motivation, another educational psychological term. Extrinsic motivation is, well, I better do this or my mom will get upset with me. Unfortunately, that's really effective in the short term for this upcoming test or something like that. But over a long term, people burn out. They get tired of it. I'm sick and tired of doing it because mom is always yelling at me. And then they withdraw, they become apathetic, and the parents are like, hey, when you're in fourth grade, you would do this stuff. Well, I'm sick and tired of doing what I'm told. What we need structurally is a turn towards intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is, why am I doing this? You might ask, why am I here talking to Alex right now? Well, it's because I saw the power when I was in high school, what Mr. Schroeder did for me. When I came to him one day, I was about to quit high school. My father had been very abusive. And I had a really bad run-in with my math teacher earlier in the morning. And I just decided, Mr. Schroeder, I'm leaving high school. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I've had it. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm burned out. And he looked at me and said, how much money do you have in your wallet? And I opened my wallet. I said, $7. He said, you just told me you were driving to Alaska. I said, yeah. He said, $7 from Southern California to Alaska. I said, you don't think I'll make it? Maybe if you could get to Bakersfield. And he said, tell me what's going on. And because of him working with me, he changed me. He showed me my strengths. He showed me my desires. And I became very motivated because of him. And I, from a personal perspective, saw the power of teaching. You could change kids' lives. You could change adults' lives. I've seen it as a professor, the same kind of thing. Every human being is sitting there saying to a teacher, please show me what I'm good at. Please get me excited about something. please let me find something on the inside that I want to do, not just because I have to get good grades and I have to do this and that, but make me be a fire. There's an old saying that says, education is not the filling of a basket, but the lighting of a fire. And right there, I think, is the root structural change that we need to, if you really want to make a difference. It's not a matter of more curriculum or a different textbook or anything like that. I have seen the power. On my website, if you go there, there's a letter from a parent who, somebody complained about my teaching techniques. And the parent said, "Are you kidding? We need more teachers like this, because I have to go in to my daughter's bedroom at night and pull the history book away from her because she's studying because of the game they're going to play the next day in his class. And I've never seen my daughter, I've never had to pull a textbook away from my daughter. I am a total believer that when kids are intrinsically motivated, man, you can't believe what you could do. But unfortunately, there's a difficulty with this. We have to look at ourselves as adults. This means we have to change. We have to change how we interact with our teens. That's really hard to do. As someone who, as I tell everybody, I had hair before I had kids. And by the way, there's not a connection there, just like the saying. It's difficult to raise teens and to listen and to change how we interact with them. If my wife were in here, she would be telling you about how I got rigid. Like my daughter came in one time, wanted to dye her hair bright red. And I dug my heels in. I don't want you doing that. And my wife was like, it's just hair. It'll grow out and it'll change back. And I grudgingly gave in. And we went down and got the hair dye. And a day or two later, she came back and said, "Dad, can you take me down and get some brown hair coloring? This looks ridiculous." And my wife looked at me with this funny grin of, you see? And I'm just as guilty as anyone else not wanting to change. I've had people, I just had a reunion with my first class, and your tattoo reminded me. One of my students who I love dearly, she looked at me and said, "Oh my gosh, you're here at our reunion." It was a virtual reunion like this. And all of a sudden she started pulling her sleeves down. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, there's another teacher that criticized me for having tattoos." And I went, "I'm here looking at your heart, your soul. Those tattoos are just art, in my opinion. And if I don't do them, but if it works for you, it works, okay? I'm the kind of person hung up on collared shirts, okay? There's a long psychology into that one. But she looked at me and said, "Really?" And I went, "You're still the wonderful person I remember from our classroom. Why would I use a superficial thing like that to break off our relationship, to condemn you?" And now we're back to being good friends again. So you see, it's even adults have that problem. Again, you can see I go on too much.
No such thing, in my opinion.
Good.
We are getting towards the end of the program, and I do like to end all of these by asking the same question, which is, throughout your entire career, your whole life's work, what is the thing that you most want to convey to other people?
Learning, caring, and living are all the same thing. Do not separate them. I am still learning. I like to point out that I learned how to do what you and I are doing right now at a much later age. I care. And to me, all of this means to live. Don't think that you stop learning when you're 22 years old and graduate from college or whatever age you are. Learning is forever. When I got my doctorate, somebody says, "Oh, you have a doctor's degree. Now you know everything." The one thing I can say on the day I graduated was I was aware how much I didn't know. By doing my research, the world opened up. Oh my goodness, look at all the things I don't know. But then I realized that's a good thing. The rest of my life, I could spend learning fun new stuff. And here we are doing Zoom. And the other day I learned how to share my computer screen using Zoom. That was this week.
I still don't know how to do that, so you're one up on me.
Down at the bottom, you'll see share screen and click on that. Anyway, that's what I would tell people. Keep learning, keep caring. That's life right there.
Well, Dr. Mooney, thank you so much for coming onto the program. Again, that's Dr. Edward Mooney and edwardmooney.net. Am I understand that correctly?
That's MOO. Thank you, Alex. I appreciate you very much.